Hi Firebirds. So, per your guys' request, I decided to do a ghost book. This is More Missouri Ghost by Joan Gilbert. It is very, very old and extremely tattered. I think I got it at either a garage sale or a free box somewhere. But it's not very long. But I do have a second book called Coast to Coast Ghost. And I will do that one after this one. So, we'll start by setting the mood here. Maybe not. I also have some new candles for when these burn out, so don't worry. Chapter 1, Apparitions. The figure was about my height, had blurry milky white features and a warm friendly smile. I knew I should be scared, but I wasn't. Then slowly, very slowly, it reached out, as if to touch me. Jim Longo and his book Haunted Odyssey. When we say ghost, most of us are thinking of an entity like Longo's, something visible, usually something white and semi-transparent, drifting about. Maybe making faint gestures, maybe attempting to speak, maybe displaying horrible injuries. This is the common image. The serious students of the supernatural tell us that we often see ghosts without realizing it because they cannot be distinguished from a living person. We're told, too, that spirits can send us messages gently into our minds, no physical manifestation necessary. We may regard their offerings as our own wit and wisdom, or as richly deserved inspiration. Missouri apparitions are as varied as everything else in this state. Some seem quite conventional, like the mother who returned from the hereafter to guide her son and provide needed light on one of the most danger-fraught nights of his life. Other visible Missouri ghosts are unusual in the extreme, like those who pass right through the body of an observer, or allow an observer to pass through them. Since these instances are relatively few in the annals of parapsychology, we'll start with two of them. Bob and Joanna Roller, now sheep farmers near Centralia, and Tim Lowry, who lives in the Kansas City area, became good friends while working at a large dairy farm near Independence on Crenshaw Road near the Little Blue River. In addition to sharing work, the three shared some ghostly experiences. Employees there had warned them that the farm was haunted. Some thought of the entity as an aging man, maybe a former owner of the dairy or a former employee. Some speculated that the manifestation came from times long before there was a dairy on the site. Stories as to what had actually been seen were vague, but this is that the three friends experienced. Tim, I would be conscious of something zipping by me, too fast to see, usually making a sort of vibrating disturbance that was very unnerving. The few times I saw anything, it was, to the best I can describe, an outline of a human figure, but filled with black emptiness, space. Bob. I saw him in the dairy, sort of lurking in corners and corridors, always watching us, looking something like a person, with a gray sheet draped over him. Once, out in the field, I saw him full body, dressed like a real person. I glanced momentarily to my equipment, and when I looked up again, he was gone, but there was no place for him to go. I knew it was the same entity by his posture and the way he kept looking around. Joanna. We were provided a place to live, a big old 2-story farmhouse. Several odd little things happened there. but my main event was seeing something streak through the rooms, looking like a person in dark draperies, or maybe a gorilla costume, which made no sense at all. But there was a feeling of animality about it. Strong movement of the air, and a big bang just before we saw it, her husband adds. I thought somebody had broken the door in, knocking it to the floor. It was Bob Roller who had a seemingly ghostly walkthrough. Tim, researching the supernatural, had decided to try to repeal the haunt by projecting the strongest rejecting attitude towards it that he could muster. Roller felt this was a mistake, that it might inspire a malignant reaction. Sure enough, when they next saw the ghost, Tim tried his experiment. The entity moved slowly towards them in what seemed a menacing way. Roller says he felt nothing when he was being passed through his body except a slight chill and hair rising on his neck. I was not afraid, Roller says. It was very quickly over, and I was somehow not afraid. I knew I was not in danger, that he was leaving rather than attacking me. Roller's experience is quite different from a walkthrough described in a novel called Foghart. Whether based on somebody's report or purely imaginary, that ghost passage was devastating. The victim suffered a nosebleed and was left weak and nauseated in her bed for a day. The Rollers and Lowry never learned of anything in the history of the dairy that would explain what they saw and felt. They are not in touch with former co-workers, so they don't know if supernatural events have continued or even whether the dairy still functions. Now, I have stories like this. I am actually a believer in supernatural stuff, and I loved reading this book. A mirror image. An interesting reversal of Bob Roller's experience came to St. Louisian Biv Jagers when she was just beginning to pursue the idea of becoming a psychic investigator. In her book, Ghost Hunting, Professional Haunted House Investigators, she recounts events of the first outing she and her husband, Ray, took with a local group of the curious. The evening's assignment was for individuals to explore separately in a decaying mansion and later pool what each might see or feel. On the third floor room Bevy entered had no furnishings but a large freestanding mirror, framed in ornately carved wood, a standard bedroom fixture of the 1800s. Before this particular mirror stood a dark-haired man, studying his reflection and muttering softly. He did not return Bev's nod of greeting, or even look at her, and she assumed he was a tenant, or a workman who had stopped at the mirror to check his appearance. His nondescript clothing suggested nothing otherworldly. Bev's whole impression was of a living person, and she passed by him to look out a dirty window. The cluttered area below had obviously once been a formal flower garden, and she felt sad that such a fine property had been abandoned to ruin. Bevy was also disappointed that she would have little to report when the group reassembled. For part of her time in the room, Bevy had been aware of the man's voice continuing its mother, but when she turned her attention from the cheerless scene below, he was gone. She walked close enough to the mirror to touch its smooth wood and joined Ray, who had waited for her in the hall. While she answered her husband's questions about whether anything had happened, Bevy turned towards the room and saw that strange man was back, in exactly the position she'd first seen him. He vanished before she could tell Ray to look. At that point, Bevy says, I knew why the back of my neck felt tingly, and when my feet were suddenly icy cold, I had just walked through a ghost. Let's see how much left we have of this chapter. I'm not sure if I just want to... Creepy enough, a number of Missouri ghost readers expressed disappointment that so few of the book stories were really scary. This one should satisfy them. In October of 1937, the Washington University Medical Alumni Quarterly recounted an experience of Joseph Nash McDowell, an anatomist, who lived from 1805 to 1868 and became prominent in the state's medical history. He was the he His was the era before Missouri law allowed medical schools legal access to human cadavers for instructional and experimental work. Individuals who were called resurrectionists or body snatchers provided these for a high fee. McDowell was not the only teacher who sometimes took students to the graveyard to secure bodies on their own. However, because he was a spiritualist, such activity caused him a great deal of guilt and fear. In this case, McDowell knew of a young German girl who had died of an unusual disease, one he felt should be studied. He led a party to exhume her, but news of their action leaked out. McDowell was warned by friends that the girl's outraged family members would soon be at the school with demands for her body and for reparation against all who had part in the disturbing of her grave. McDowell went to the college at 11 o'clock that night to hide the girl's body. His destination was the attic, where some unusual arrangement in the rafters would allow concealment. As recounted in the alumni publication, I had ascended one flight of stairs when out went my lamp. I laid down the corpse and re-struck a light. I then picked up the body, and out went my light again. I felt for another match in my pocket, when I distinctly saw my dear old grandmother, who had been dead these many years, standing a little off distance, beckoning to me. In the middle of the passage was a window. I saw her in front of it. I walked along close to the wall, with the corpse over my shoulder, and went to the top loft and hid it. Being very familiar with his surroundings, McDowell descended in the dark, which enabled him to look down the stairwell without being seen, and watched 3 armed men standing up from the ground floor. McDowell's only possible hiding place was the dissection room, which he knew would be their first stop. Looking in, he saw my spirit mother standing near the table from which I had just taken the corpse. The halo surrounding his mother helped McDowell see the table clearly and take the unfortunate girl's place, pulling over his face the sheet that had covered hers. McDowell does not describe the fear and stress he felt, sharing a corpse's sheet, aware that his career and the school's reputation were at risk, not to mention his own life. He says only, "I lay like marble." The party of men entered and began lifting sheets. McDowell knew that the first 2 bodies were male, the next 2 dark-haired women. The German maiden had blonde hair. At McDowell's table, one man commented, "Here's a fellow who died in his boots," and did not bother to lift the sheets. McDowell wrote of an inexplicable urge to raise up and frighten the searchers, but his mother whispered to him, "Be still." McDowell continued to lie like marble, listening as the men visited every room in the building. When they finally left, he was able to slip out without being noticed. Next day, the danger seemed to have blown over, and he wrote, "We dissected the body, buried the fragments, and had no further trouble." He does not remark on whether or not the terrifying episode yielded anything of scientific value. McDowell became one of the state's leading surgeon and a founder of the first successful medical college west of the Mississippi. A much-viewed ghost. Why do people keep moving out of that house? There's something. Jim Reck, news anchor for television station NBC8 in Columbia, says those words have been exchanged many times about his childhood home in Jefferson City. Several people who had lived in the 150-year-old house reported seeing the apparition of a young girl there. Some spoke freely of it on a televised news feature with Reck in May of 1999. Fred Seaman, former councilman for Jefferson City, bought the house in 1973. That's the year my mom was born. Though nothing harmed or even frightened anyone, the family found definitely unusual aspects to the new home. One sunshiny day, Seaman awoke from a nap, aware of a movement in the room. He looked up and saw a little girl walking away from him down the hallway. She turned, glanced back, and went to the bathroom. He followed her and found the room empty. Seaman says the child was wearing a long white dress, or perhaps a nightgown, and had something in her hair, a ribbon or a flower. Seaman's daughter became accustomed to the footsteps on the stairs near her own bedroom door. After looking in vain for the cause, she accepted the sounds as just another quirk of the house. Living there made Halloween kind of special, Seaman laughs. Reich himself, as a child, sometimes saw the ghost dress him in his peripheral vision as he played on the floor. In these earliest instances, he would feel someone approaching, and then pausing beside him, as any child might to watch another's play. If he looked up, hoping to see all of her, there usually was nothing. But by looking down, he could see her again from the corner of his eye. Today, Wright comments that he saw the little ghost hundreds of times during his 18 years in the house, and that she looked as substantial and real as any living person. Sometimes he saw her more than once in a day. Sometimes he did not see her for a month at a time. Reich says he occasionally saw enough of the little ghost to know her garment was ivory or cream-colored, and rather formal-looking, with a high neck and buttoned up the front. Covered her feet completely. He could not see whether or not she wore shoes. One of Reich's big regrets is that he never questioned his late mother more about the story of the house. He remembers that she didn't believe at first the local tale that a little girl had died a terrible death there. Supposedly the child fell into a pigsty and was killed by the animals. Miss Reich researched the matter enough to be convinced that such a death did occur, but Jim does not remember her ever discussing it in full. Somehow the family did not talk about the ghost much, did not share details of their experiences with it. One of the residents of the house, after the Reichs left, it hired someone to come there and search with a metal detector for something unrelated to the stories. Reich says that in the area where the pig pen had been, they discovered a tiny plain gold band of the type fashionable for children in the early 1900s and before. One incident in history of the place might be interpreted as a benevolent act from the little ghost. Harold Krieger, a Jefferson City accountant 50 years ago, as a child playing hide-and-seek with friends, found an old gas refrigerator in the basement and got into it. Young Krieger was horrified to find that he could not get out, and he knew that his mother was shopping and would be away for hours. He did not become the second child to die on the property, however. By some means, there in the dark, he found the very small hole through which gas had been piped into the box. He breathed through that opening until he was missed and rescued. Reich's television program about his childhood home included comments from some professors of psychology. One of these, Frank Clary from St. Louis University, said scientific research still has not produced proof against many of the parapsychology's contentions. He said, "We live in a mysterious world, and nobody knows everything." Dr. James Howard of Southern Illinois University concurred. "We cannot dismiss things just because we don't understand them. Many of these matters need to be taken seriously." Sweet haunt, I hear the clatter of your chains, whose length makes song, whose strength detains. Actor James Cagney. Ghost, crouch at the foot of the bed, duck beneath the stair, slip into shadow. Their voices echo around us. I hear them whisper my name, Elizabeth Hanley. And that's the end of chapter 1.